Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to today's lesson 1-3, adding and subtracting fractions. Our learning targets today are 1, to solve problems with fractions using adding and subtracting, and the second one is to estimate with fractions. Some of the examples that we're going to do today come from page 7 in our Springboard book, or the lesson starts on page 7, or if you would like some extra examples, you can turn there also. So, adding and subtracting rules have the exact same start, which is the first one right here is that they must have the same denominator. I want you to remember that the numerator, as far as fraction, numerator, denominator, it's that denominator right there that has to be the same, okay, whenever we're adding, and we'll see that in just a moment, when we're adding or subtracting. The second step, depending on if you are adding fractions, you will add the numerators. If you are subtracting fractions, you will subtract the numerators. And then step 3 is to keep the denominator. And then step 4 is to simplify if possible. Okay? I'm going to do a couple of adding fraction examples on the next slide, and then I'll do a couple of subtracting. So on to the next slide. Okay, example 1. Here are adding examples. Okay, our first example is 7/8 plus 2/3. A very basic problem here. Our denominators are not the same, so what I'm going to do over here to the side, here are my denominators of 8 and 3. Over here to the side, you can list out the two denominators and start listing out the multiples. 8 times 1 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 8 times 3 is 24, 8 times 4 is 32, and we could go on, but let's see if we've got a common denominator here. 3 times 3 is 1, 3 times 2 is 6, 3 times 3 is 9, 3 times 4 is 12, 3 times 5 is 15, 3 times 6 is 18, 3 times 7 is 21, 3 times 8 is 24, if I can fit it on the slide here. Here we go. 24, there we go. And there's our common denominator. Okay, is that 24? So 24 is going to be the same denominator for both. Then whenever you are, whatever I had to do to 8, I had to take 8 times 3 to get 24, so I'm going to take 7 times 3, so that's 21. And then for my other fraction, I had to take 3 times 8 to get 24, so I'm going to take 2 times 8, that is 16. Then, so I have my common denominators now. The next step in adding fractions is to add the numerators. So if I add 21 and 16, I get 37. So I added the numerators. Next step is to keep the denominator. The denominator was 24. And then our last step is to simplify if possible. And since this is an improper fraction, I am going to take that numerator and divide it by the denominator. And I'm going to change it to a mixed number. 21 goes into 37 one time. I subtract, I get 13 left over. So 1 is my whole number. Okay, I have 13 is my numerator. And then I have 24 is my denominator. So my final answer is 1 and 3 24ths. 1 and 3 over 24. I've got it color coded here. If that helps you to do that in your notes as well, that would be just fine. So there's my final answer. So example number 2 is 12 and 5/6 plus 9 and 3/4. Common denominators. I'm just going to go ahead and do this in my head. I know that 6 and 4 both go into 12 because 6 times 2 is 12 and 5 times 2 is 10. And then 4 times 3 was 12, so 3 times 3 is 9. So if I go ahead and add my numerators, 10 plus 9 is 19, and that was over 12. Go ahead and add your whole numbers, which I had 21, okay? So I'm going to do what I did above here, which was I took this fraction and I took 19. I'm going to take 19 and divide it by 12. I'm looking at this fractional part right here, and I'm simplifying it. 12 goes into 19 once with 7 left over. So that was 1 7/12. Okay, but don't forget that I still had 21 wholes that I need to add to that because I already had 21 wholes. So when I combine those all together, that's a total of 22 and 7/12. Okay, so those are my two adding examples, and on the next slide I'm going to do subtracting. Here we go, subtracting examples. Problem number 1, we're going to do 7/8 minus 2/3. Okay, so again, common denominator between 8 and 3. We already figured that out. That was 24. And we had to take 8 times 3 to get 24, so 7 times 3 is 21. And 3 times 8 was 24, so 2 times 8 is 16. Add those together, I get 37. Nope, I'm not adding. Whoops, I am subtracting. Okay, there we go, I'm subtracting. Might want to highlight that. So I'm taking 21, take away 16, and that is 5. When I take 21 minus 16, that is 5, and then that is over 24, and 5/24 does not simplify, so that is my final answer. Problem 2, or example number 2, is 12 1/8. Take away 9 3/4. Common denominator between these two is 8. And I go ahead and write it over here to the side. I don't have to change it. 8 times 1 is 8, so 1 times 1 is 1. That numerator doesn't change. But 4 had to be doubled, so I need to double its numerator, which would be 6. And again, let me point out to myself, I'm subtracting. Well, here, I can't subtract 6 from 1. Do not put a 5 down here because this does not say 6 minus 1. It says 1. It says 1 minus 6. Okay? So what I need to do is go next door to borrow. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to make 12 11. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add, I just borrowed 1 whole, and I'm going to add 8/8 to the 1/8 I already had there. So if I have 1/8 and I add 8/8, that is 9. Okay, that final would be 9/8, right? Another shortcut, I want you to look at this 9. Okay, if I took my original, this always works. If I take my original denominator and add the numerator, what is 8 plus 1? That is also 9. So you don't necessarily have to do this extra work over here to the side to show it. You could just take 8 plus 1, and that new numerator then is going to be 9. If you have 9 take away 6, you get 3 over 8. And 11 take away 9 is 2. So my final answer then is 2 3/8. Okay, so that concludes today's lesson over subtracting and adding with fractions. The goal is that we would be able to solve problems involving fractions with addition and subtraction, and we would be able to estimate with fractions. Okay, so thank you, and here we go. Summary. If you will write 2 to 3 sentences here about what you just learned, or a summary about adding and subtracting fractions. Thank you and have a great day.